First of all, welcome to you, Bernie Clark. We're really happy to have you. Bernie is a Left Coast Writers member and has agreed, he's got a book out, a new book out, and he's agreed to talk a little bit about craft with us. His book, which is a book of historical fiction, is we're very it's exciting because it's about the Bible and he uses a lot of history in his book. Bernie was born in 1958 in Hertfordshire, England, and it wasn't until he moved to America that he found his creative voice. During his working years, he hosted poetry open mics at Java Beach and Sacred Grounds in San Francisco, published three poetry books, Cafe Latte, Spritzers, and Goo Goo Gachoob, so he started off in poetry, the latter also comprising a collection of short stories. He was also inspired to create a children's book, David Oodle's Doodle, which was illustrated by Kay Plotner. And it potentially relates the adventure of a boy who draws fantastic doodles with his magical pen. But since then, he actually embarked on an incredible work. I think it's 3 volumes, Bernie, is it?
It is,
And
yes,
you
3 volumes.
completed the first of the volumes. It's not the Gnostic Gospels, which exist, but now we have the agnostic Gospels, and this is book one that we're going to be talking about tonight. So, Bernie, I think this is a huge project, and I'm interested in why you began researching and tackling such a topic. It's about Jesus Christ and his background, and we know that that is a topic that excites and can enrage people depending on how
Mhm.
you're focusing on it. What was the motivation?
Okay, so I have to preface this by saying I'm not a religious man,
Ah,
which is strange, it's odd. But I used to sing in a church choir right from the early age of about 6. A very close friend of mine, Clifford Lavin, and we used to pontificate about the Bible, and at the time when we were young, Chariots of the Gods was a Eric von Daniken was a big deal. Was God an astronaut? So,
hmm.
as kids, we talked about this. And one of the things back then was we talked about, did Jesus really exist? And there wasn't, but back in our early youth, there weren't a lot of documentaries about this or a lot of questions about this. But anyway, it was out there as a question. And then unfortunately, Cliff died early. Well, he died at 48. And when he died, it kind of I set something off inside of me to actually reinvigorate this quest and this question: is that did Jesus exist? So I started reading about it, and I found out that there are at least 18 missing years in the Bible. So I thought, this is really interesting. So I started to write a story, and it occurred to me that I wanted to write it not from a religious point of view, but from an agnostic point of view. So that if Jesus was really a man that really lived, and probably did, although there's not a lot of historic evidence, how did it go down? What happened? And if he was the Son of God, how did it go down? So I want my reader to be able to read this story, and it's non-judgmental. And I do believe that the reader will come out of it. The agnostic will say, "Well, that's interesting." The atheist will say, "Ah, yeah, that's right. That's how it worked." And the believer will say, "See, that's how it happened. Jesus was the Son of God." So I guess the difficulty I've had is it's taken me a long time to read a lot, do a lot of research, and mixing the Bible with Apocrypha and the stories I grew up with of Joseph Arimathea coming to Britain with Jesus. So I guess once I got started, it just became, I guess, a work of a labor of love in a way to really delve in and tell a story. And I got my teeth into it, and unfortunately, it took me 10 years.
A decade.
Yeah.
Well, I think it took, didn't it take Moses like 40 to get
Oh,
out of
yeah, that's right. We
Sinai?
were
So
wandering. I've been
it's
wandering in the wilderness, that's for sure.
if
Yeah.
it weren't an endeavor of biblical proportions, I don't think it would be right for the topic.
Yeah.
another question that I have, I'm going to ask you to read a little bit of it to start out with, but it is sort of it is kind of a daunting task. It's an incredible task. First of all, the Bible is the best-selling book ever in the history of mankind. It sold more copies than anything else over time. And it's been translated to many, many languages. So you're taking on information that is neither, it's not really historical, and but it's kind of historical, and it's religious, and it's so many different things, and so many different people have their hearts sort of wound into it, and their belief system based on it. So it was a prodigious kind of thing to do,
Sure.
you had to be very brave to do that, or did you just sort of dive in?
I dove in. I think what I've got going for me is the Bible itself is full of ambiguity. The four Gospels don't agree with each other, and so there's over the 2,000 years of the writings that have been become the New Testament, they've been chopped and changed, and things have been altered. And you've got 1850, you've got the Pope deciding certain things. 1967, the Pope is making pontifications about who Mary Magdalene was. So the Bible, as we understand it, it's a bit of a gumbo, and people they take what they want out of it. You know, all the nativity stuff and all of that, that's not in all four Gospels. Was Jesus born in Bethlehem? Two of the Gospels say no. You know, so what? So I'm lucky in that by getting in there, I'm able to pick and choose, quote unquote, historical facts from the Bible, and weave the things together that help tell my story. So, I think the harder thing is doing the research, and I'm not in fear of the writing of it.
So that of course brings up the whole issue of research. And I know that a lot of people who are researching books, especially historical books or books of historical fiction, um, or just historical books in general, get this thing called research rapture, where they get so enraptured by the research that it becomes difficult to actually write the book. How far and wide was your research? What kind of research did you do? Where did you have to go? You were mentioning different apocrypha, you were mentioning different places that you found information. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because it seems like it would be so comprehensive. How did you pick your places? Otherwise, you might still be researching.
Yeah, so I think there are different categories of things to research. I mean, there's the geographical, political environment at the time. So you've got historical, I'm talking about Roman times. I've got quite a bit to reference. I'm talking about places in Judea, Palestine, and in Britain. And so I can, if I want somebody to go from somewhere to somewhere, I need to work out, well, I've got to work out what were the ships of the day. What was a Corbiter? How big was a Corbiter? How fast did it go? And what did they carry? How much tin could Joseph of Arimathea trade in his ship? So you get, like you say, you go into something like that, you spend a whole day or so looking at Corbiters and deciding what ship he's got. And then you've got to decide, where would they go? And are there interesting places on the journey that you could put into a story that would be interesting to the reader? So, for instance, they went to Rhodes, and we know about the Colossus of Rhodes. So maybe there's something to talk about the Colossus of Rhodes. So off we go there. Who was Caesar at the time? Augustus. What do we know about Augustus? So there's a lot of, as I'm telling the story, and it's a chronological story. So that's kind of easy for me. I know that Jesus as a young man isn't, as a child, isn't in Britain. I know he's in Judea. So it's easy for, now I need to choose, where. And things like Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered at Qumran. Well, Qumran is by the Dead Sea, and I happen to have been there. So it's kind of nice that I can imagine it and say, okay, he's going to spend some time there, and I can tell the story from there. And so as I tell the story, it's a bit like it's like going down the shopping aisle. I'm telling the story and saying, oh, I need one of those. Oh, that's interesting. I'll boom that in. So, I've got this linear path and I'm deciding how to augment it with interesting bits of history. And sorry, yeah.
Well, as a reader, I was fascinated by how much of the history was in there and how detailed it seemed, and how much territory you crossed. How many you mentioned some of the different places. You go all over the world with this book. You have so many characters, and then you sort of tease them out of the information that we have in the Bible, and I'm assuming other places as well, to become
Yeah.
fully formed characters that are so believable that you almost feel, and so accurate, and yet and in a language that makes you feel like it could be present day. It's not, it doesn't feel artificial. It just feels something that people would experience today. So I thought that was wonderful. It might be great if you would at this point read a little bit so people can get
Yeah.
a feel for the way you're managing this information in story. Would you mind doing that for us?
Sure. A short reading, a page and a half.
Okay.
I'm going to introduce Joseph of Arimathea because the first gospel is called Arimathea. And so this is where we meet Joseph of Arimathea for the first time. The chapter's called New Friendships. Joseph of Arimathea walked slowly, picking his way with a long staff along a stony road that wound up the southeastern slope of the Mount of Olives toward the small village of Bethany, about 2 miles east of Jerusalem. The afternoon sun of Shevat cast shadows off the white stone dwellings scattered among the olive groves, each house with its own walled garden and a flat roof accessible by a flight of external stone steps. The fields surrounding the village were delineated by dry stone walls. Joseph stopped by one to sit and catch his breath. Even as a fit man in his 30s, he found it hard going. He took a draught from his camel leather water pouch and he used the back of his hand to wipe the excess water from his slightly graying beard as he watched a few sheep picking their way over the fallen limestone rocks of a breached wall. He was reminded of the hard labor it had taken a poor farmer to move each rock into place, and a brief recognition of relief ran through his mind. Thanks be to God that he could now hire people to do such work for him. The limestone of the area was responsible for the caves that could be found on the lower slopes below the village and higher up on the mount. Many of these caves have been utilized as tombs, even more so on the southwestern end of the mount. Indeed, Joseph had recently acquired a plot in a rock wall where he could build his own tomb one day. He gathered himself, slung his water pouch over his shoulder, and continued his journey toward the village. Bethany was well known by pilgrims traveling into Jerusalem. They often took advantage of the cheaper accommodations and more affordable food there before going into the city. Joseph arrived at the main water well, situated under the shade of an old cedar in the center of the village. As in most villages, the well served as a gathering place, mostly for women and children passing the time of day while fetching water. But there was no one there this day. He stopped to refill his pouch and to rest on a low stone bench before completing his journey to the villa of Simon ben Judah. The exertion of the walk up the hill had taken its toll, and Joseph soon succumbed to fatigue, letting his body recline on the bench. He fell into a deep sleep and his mind wandered back to the days when he'd first met Simon. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's
so just
wonderful.
what's going on in there, though? So Bethany is a major location in the Bible, and Simon the Pharisee. He's in the Bible. Things happen there at Simon's villa, and we have Mary and Martha have an event at Simon's villa. So these little things, for those people that know some of the stories of the Bible, it's basically hopefully the reader that knows those things saying, oh, Bethany, and oh yeah, Simon the Pharisee. That's kind of what I'm trying to do there.
Well, I thank you for starting with that reading, because Joseph is such an important character in this book. And he's such a powerful character in this book, point of view character. And although you move in, it's a close third. So we get to go into different people's heads we're in Joseph's head quite a bit. And he is the organizing sort of principle behind the first part, at least of this book. I haven't read the others because you haven't written them
I
yet.
haven't finished Magdalene. Magdalene's going to be out in summer.
Oh, wow. So I will be reading those as well. But you create this sort of, it's very cinematic. And I really do feel that I'm right on the shoulder of this point of view character, Joseph. Why did you why did you select Joseph for that first POV character for that?
Yeah, thank you. It came together, I think, quite logically because I'm a computer guy, right? That's what I did for a living. But Jesus, there's these 18 years at least missing in the Bible. We have him from when he's 12 until he shows up sometime in his 30s to do his ministry. I grew up with stories of Joseph of Arimathea going to Britain, right? He's the guy that took the Holy Grail to Britain, which is why King Arthur and his knights are running around looking for it. And along with that, Jesus is supposed to have gone to Britain. Why is Jesus hanging out with Joseph of Arimathea? Why is Joseph of Arimathea, the guy with the tomb that we just heard about, is his tomb that Jesus is put into when he's taken down from the cross? It's Joseph of Arimathea that goes to Pontius Pilate and says, can you give me Jesus's body without breaking the legs, please? So we learn, so there's this Joseph of Arimathea is quite a powerful guy. Jesus is the son of a carpenter. You know, what's going on? So when I found out that Joseph was apocryphally Jesus's great uncle, I serendipitously, when I'm writing the story about Jesus at the Passover at the age of 12, he willfully stays behind at the temple and talks to the scribes and Pharisees, and his mother and father are beside themselves when they think he's lost. And they come back to find him. And it's not like this in the Bible, but I make it like this in my story. They come back to find him and they say, "What are you doing there?" And I quote what's in the Bible, but I quote it with a different meaning. He says, "Well, where do you expect to find me other than in the house of my father?" Now, here's a boy who's a bastard, right? Joseph the carpenter isn't his father. And all his life, his friends have known that he's not really the son of Joseph. So he's turning around and basically he's sticking a finger up he's saying, "I'm here." So at that point, we don't hear any more about him, right? We don't hear anything else about Joseph, his father, but we don't hear him until he shows up again. So what I do is I say his great uncle, who is a wealthy man, who turns out to be a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, he's a wealthy Pharisee, says, "I'm going to take this kid, and I'm going to sort him out." So Joseph of Arimathea becomes the architect. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, but we won't know that till the third book. But Joseph of Arimathea becomes the architect of Jesus' life. And he is a Pharisee, which means he believes in the resurrection. The Sadducees didn't believe in that. And so he's got a political axe to grind. It would really be nice to have the Messiah come back now. And they're all looking for the Messiah at this time. There are messiahs coming and going. There are messiahs that start revolts and they get killed and get left in the streets to eaten by dogs. But he's got his dog in the fight, and he's going to make sure that Yeshua Jesus could fulfill the scriptures and be the Messiah. That's why he's so important in this story. And it all goes terribly wrong.
Does he thread through the future volumes as well? Is he going to appear in soon?
He's right through to the end because it's his tomb, that Jesus is put into. I call him Yeshua in my stories. Yeah. So he is a very key character in this whole thing. And also you'll learn he becomes the ward of Mary Magdalene. So he has a very strong influence on Magdalene as well.
Now that's completely invented by you.
Completely.
So the wonderful part about the book is while I was reading it, I was like, well, is this part real? Is this part real? On all of these things, there's a part where he goes to the East and for the teachings of the Buddha. And so I had to look that up and check out the timing of when
I have to qualify that. He doesn't, in this book, he doesn't actually go there yet. He reads he studies with the Essenes, which
He's
is
reading
not
with-
made up at all.
when he's
And
staying with the Essenes.
I mean,
Yeah.
he could have stayed with the Essenes, and the Essenes were friends with the Pharisees, but not the Sadducees. And the Essenes believed in a Messiah. They believed in a double Messiah, so John the Baptist gets into the picture. But while he's with the Essenes, he's introduced, because though the Essenes wrote all the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're the people copying scribing all the stuff. So they've got all the Buddha stuff there. 500 years before Jesus, there's Buddha. So Yeshua gets a chance to see that information. And this is the turning point. This is where Jesus takes away from there being a vengeful God and a destructive God to a loving God. Jesus actually flips the switch on God. And basically, it's all about kindness and love and do unto others.
Right.
Very Buddhist, very Eastern, do unto others is the golden rule, you know. And the Essenes were big into baptism, cleansing with water. So this is where John the Baptist is with the Essenes, because he's Jesus' cousin. They're there at the same time. So the whole Buddha thing happens. It starts to happen there and influencing his thinking. And in the third book, Yeshua, well, actually at the end of Magdalene, he will go to Tibet. And we'll pick up on all the stories, lots of stories about Jesus in Tibet. I don't have to make them up. There's a lot of stuff there already. I just need to pick and choose what makes sense.
So what's really interesting is the way you selected these characters that you're talking about, the Essenes, characters from each of these movements in Jesus's the story of Jesus's life, and how you've knit them all together and given them personalities, identities, and purposes in the story for moving the story of Jesus along.
Sure.
So how did you decide which ones were going to be the most important for you? Did it just come to you that for this particular part of the story, this person is going to be important? Or do you find that they're already there in the core story of Jesus?
Yeah, there are some that weren't at all, that you wouldn't read about in the Bible, that are historical figures. The one that comes to mind is Ovid, the poet, the Roman poet.
That one surprised me.
Surprised me. I mean, I'm doing my research, and I'm finding out that around 6 AD, Judea becomes a province, and not long after that, Augustus's granddaughter and husband and another guy, a brother, the grandson, are convicted of committing a crime, of plotting against Augustus. Right? Now, I make all this happen in Jerusalem because they go to Judea to celebrate the new province, and they're the Roman cohort that goes. And at the same time, Ovid is I guess, entwined in that plot. He knew about it. This is historical. He knew about it, and so Augustus banished Ovid to somewhere in the Black Sea or something. So Ovid actually got banished because he was involved, embroiled in this plot, and knew about it, but didn't say anything. So what I do is I have that happen in Jerusalem, and Arimathea is charged because he's a friend of Augustus, because he's a tin trader and a tin merchant, and he's known Augustus for many years. He is entrusted with this running the affair for this celebration of Judea, where Quirinius is going to be the new governor, all true. And suddenly he's got this plot on his hands, and now I've got Ovid in the story. And in learning more about, I didn't know much about Ovid at all, but what I did learn about Ovid is at the time he was writing a book about love, and Yeshua doesn't like Ovid because he's a Roman. You know, the Romans are pagans. The pantheon of gods, that's no good at all. It's Jesus wants to have one God, right? And he's talking to Ovid, and he says, "Don't tar me with the same brush, young man," because Ovid's about 50. "Don't tar me with the same brush." He said, "What you might not understand is what I believe in is love." So now once we've got this reinforcement of love being the thing. Now also, Ovid they have to travel back to Rome with Ovid, and Ovid can teach him and Magdalene at the same time, tell him how to tell stories. How did Jesus become such a great parable teller? how to become a great storyteller. He's got to learn from someone, right? So
Right. And
why not Ovid?
brilliant. Yeah. Yeah.
So it just all fell into place then, right? It's like you pick at certain things, and serendipitously, I was finding, wow, I guess being open to what I'm seeing and saying, yeah, that'll go in the gumbo, just nice,
But that was genius because Ovid has never been part of the Jesus story.
Never.
Threw that in, I was like, oh my God, here comes a little Greek history in here too,
Yeah.
from Greek literature, because I remember reading Ovid when I was in school and comparative literature. And when he appeared in your book, I was like, oh my God, this is wonderful. And yes, he wrote about love.
Yeah.
So it was quite an quite a surprising and pleasing combination that you put together there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Um, and your book does cover a lot of terrain. I really
Yeah.
felt it was an international sort of story, and a very widespread sort of. You didn't just center it in Jerusalem. It sort of reached out.
Yeah, it's Roman Empire. It's the known one. I mean, Jesus doesn't go to America in my book, that's
No,
but
but he does in some ways. I'm guessing by the end of your, well, is it a trilogy?
the trilogy, yeah.
At the
Well,
end of your trilogy, the he does parts of him or things from Jesus move all the way to Britain, but and you have to the story is international now. I mean, the story
oh,
of Jesus.
sure. I mean, a lot of the story is in, well, about half the story is in Britain. And, he's 16 years old and learning things, as it were. But so, yeah, I think it's mostly, I mean, it's mostly the Holy Land as we know it today, Italy, Rome, all right, because they've got to go to Rome. You get a lot of information about Rome, what was going on in Rome. And then we move on, and we don't go across land, across France, across Gaul. We sail around to Britain, to Cornwall, and where the tin mines are, right? That's where the tin trade. The Phoenicians had established those. So I'm not making this up. The Phoenicians had these routes there for hundreds of years, and they were trading tin all around the empire, right, to make bronze. Right? So you got copper and tin, you make bronze. So yeah, so it is. I'd have to say it. The Scotland is involved. So I don't think I can spoil anything by saying I'm enamored with the Western Isles of Scotland. And so we have Iona, those people that are, I guess, maybe religiously inclined might know about Iona and the importance of Iona. So all of that comes into it. But yeah, I don't, it's Roman Empire, basically, at this point. And then it will be Tibet, the Silk Road. Right? So
Wow.
we've got ways to get out there easily. And we can learn things there, and then he comes back, and then we pretty much follow the Gospels, which don't all agree with each other. But the timeline of his ministry, once he gets back, he's got about 3 years after he gets baptized by John the Baptist, and John the Baptist gets his head chopped off. That's historical fact. To basically to spread his message and do what he's intending to do. He's not killed by, he's not crucified by accident. There's and even in the Bible, you can read that. If you read the Bible, you understand what he's doing. So, yeah.
Well, I love the way you made him into such a character who's so modern in so many ways. He's very young, he's very curious, he's exploring all of these things. It makes the novel very appropriate for our times. He's crossing all these different lines of belief and geography and religion. I think that's one of the things that really intrigued me about the book. When you were doing this, did you work with maps? Huge, I can picture
Yeah.
these huge
Oh,
maps.
yeah.
And
I
what were
was
some of your
I was
tools?
trained as a cartographer. So I love that.
Oh,
It was natural for me to want to know the journey and the places that they were going to, and how fast could you sail from here to there, and what were the prevailing winds at that time of year, things like that. But yeah, maps, definitely. I googled the earth. No, I googled a lot of things, and so a lot of the places that that the story visits are real places some of which I've been to and taken photographs of, some that I haven't been to yet. But they're real places, and in history, they could have played a part in this story. There's nothing. This is entirely plausible. This story.
Yes.
You could follow this story and say, oh yeah, that could have gone down like that. It's realistic. And I don't think I cross too many boundaries. I don't violate too many boundaries on the religious side of things. I think I try to address those and say how Jesus comes to his way of thinking and why. And yeah, I love maps.
So as a travel writer, that's one of the things I found the most intriguing in reading the book. I really found it just moved me through the world in such a way that it felt like as if I were there.
Thank you. Yeah.
And your characters all felt really, really realistic. I want to ask you a little bit about the character of Mary Magdalene.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a very important character in the book. She's very close to him. Um, how important was she to you in putting together the story? What role is she playing?
Without giving away too much, she's the most important person in the trilogy. She has a knock-on effect in history, and she's the feminine divine. So I wanted that angle to be represented. I wanted to show Jesus was not, what should I say, a misogynist, you know. And so what I want to do with Mary is show that she wasn't the prostitute, you know. That's been refuted anyway. That's been sorted out. There are choices to make who Mary is, but she's an enigma. She really is an enigma, even in the Bible. There's not a lot about her in the Bible, and people get confused. Well, people don't get confused. There is confusion over the Marys in the Bible. Like, was the Mary the woman that had the demons outcast, the same Mary who was with Martha when she washes Jesus's feet? And I say no. I say Mary is Martha's sister, and they had a rift between them. And how did that happen? That's important. Why is there a rift between Martha and Mary? And why is Mary so? Just in this one incident in the Bible, they're at Simon the Pharisee's villa, and Mary is washing Jesus's feet, and Martha is in the kitchen getting the dips ready, you know, getting the cheese and dips. And Martha comes in and says, Mary, you know, she's a younger sister. She's 2 years younger than Martha. She says, Mary, you come in the kitchen and help me. And Jesus says, no, she's doing her thing. She's washing my feet, and she's where she wants to be. And so that says, well, there's a rift here between these two. And why is Jesus so defensive of Mary? Right? So that all happens after this first book. That hasn't happened yet. It will all happen after this book, but he's already created a bond with Mary. Do they get married? Well, you know, you read the book. I'm not going there, but she's a very important person to him, just because, and he doesn't know why she's important to him. He just knows that she's an important person. So the book begins with Mary. There's a prologue before what I just read to you, and the prologue is Mary and the two other women visiting the tomb after Jesus has been crucified. And that's right out of John, the Gospel of John. Jesus says to Mary, I want you to go and tell the other disciples that I've risen, or that I'm resurrected. So he's chosen her, right? And there's a lot of uproar and furore about that amongst the theologians. You know, why does John say she's got first dibs on telling the other disciples? What's that about? And Peter and the other disciples are all upset. So she's clearly to Jesus. If you read the Gospel of John, she is very important. So I wanted that to carry through, and without revealing, there are aspects of her life that may well have impacted British history. So maybe there's a fourth gospel to write.
Well, that I have to say, Bernie, is one of the reasons I was so taken by the book, was the way you deal with the Mary Magdalene. And I thought it was refreshing. And I also thought it was, for some reason, it felt more real to me in terms of the characters being actual human beings.
Mm-hmm.
It gave the entire story of Jesus and his interactions with the people around him, um, as a being on this planet, a lot more depth and a lot more verisimilitude. I mean, it felt like he was a real person. And I want to say that you sort of took him out of the crypt and put him into the world in a
Well,
way.
thank you.
And
Yeah.
that's the part that I like the most about the book, is
Mm-hmm.
I felt that I was reading a story about a real human being who was encountering a real moment in time and
Mm-hmm.
was very much the victim, as we all are, of the streams of history and politics, all
Mm-hmm.
of these things and passion that are going on around him, and of his circle and the way they were being buffeted about by the what was going on in the world around them.
Yeah.
So they weren't in this little box; they were out there, just like we are.
Yeah.
Dealing with the political and the social realities of their day. I thought, and yet really true to, like, I could see in Old Jerusalem. I mean, I could see it was really great in the historicity of it. It just really created a really wonderful historical context.
Thank you.
I've raved about it enough.
Ah,
I'm sure I think other people may have some questions. So I'm wondering if we could open it up, Elizabeth, to questions at this point.
There are no questions at this point, but people might not know they can put questions in the chat if they have any. Hi.
Oh, so people, if you have questions, you can write them in your chat box, and then we'll give them to Bernie. Um, I can continue to ask you some questions about.
sure. Yeah, I've got some specific things I'd like to answer.
And oh, what would those be, Bernie?
Well,
Let you talk about
well,
it.
I think from the point of view of the listener to this, who's assuming is a writer, right, is what are some of the big challenges that I face? Now, I'm not a trained, scholar and writer. I'm just a guy writing a story. I like to write poetry. I like to write short stories. I'm writing this story. So the first thing is, so what's the language? How am I going to deal with language? I can't use modern terms because that gives a bump to the reader, right? There are certain terms I can write in a modern way, but I can't use certain terms that would not be of the day. And how do they all talk to each other? I mean, Jesus is Aramaic, right? He's talking Aramaic. You got Romans talking Latin. You got Greek, and you got the Bible written in Greek and Hebrew. And then he goes to Britain, and you're dealing with Brythonic languages. You've got Celts, and you've got, how do you do this? So you have to realistically paint a picture for the reader so that, for instance, Ovid can teach them Latin, right? Start to teach them some Latin so he might not have learned Latin yet, right? He might have learned some Latin with the Essenes, but maybe not. And then when they're going towards Britain, they pick up a guy, Aravaci, a sea captain, who is from Gaul, he's a Celt, and he's able to introduce them to the language before they land in Albion, before they get to Britain. So and then you just have to, you've got to get the willing suspense of disbelief, or you've got once the reader's in, you just got to not destroy that illusion that they can actually communicate with each other. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to have broken language. You want to have them talk to each other. Right? And so that for me was one of the biggest challenges, was working out what's the narrative here? How do they talk with each other? And how do you get away with it? So I think I've done it, and I found a style that works. And
Mhm.
so I'll carry on with that. But just for somebody else, if you approach something like this, I think you really have to think about if you're crossing boundaries and crossing cultures, how do you do that? You know?
That is a big issue for writers. Often what they'll do is they'll set up a line or two of what especially with dialect and things like
Yeah,
that, of what the dialect sounds like, and then they abandon that. And it's interesting when a reader is reading, once they plant that voice in their head for that particular character, that's the voice that they hear,
yeah,
or
yeah.
what you write. So
Hmm.
it's almost like they're translating it or changing it in their head as they read, so that you
Hmm.
don't have to carry that particular bias of the particular pattern of speech through the entire thing, because that would be very annoying.
Yeah,
And they'll just pick it up and they'll know, oh, this person talks that way, and they'll hear the speaking in their head. There are different ways that people manage that, but that is always a challenge when you're crossing cultures. I think
hmm,
very much a challenge these days, so that you're not exploiting a particular group of people by using their language in a way that isn't necessarily their dialect, in a way that isn't necessarily something that really represents who they are.
yeah, yeah. So I think it kind of works for me, and I carry on with it. Um,
I
yeah,
think you did a good job of it
well,
anyway.
thank you. Yeah, and the other thing is just a lot of research for the locations. So I mean, I have been to Israel, I've been to Jerusalem, so I had old Jerusalem is still old Jerusalem. You've seen it on TV. That's the way it is. But things like roundhouses, Iron Age roundhouses in Britain, what was that like? So we visited Britain. We went to a couple of places that historical museums that showed those.
Oh, that's
Um,
the fun
yeah,
part.
so it's kind of nice. And we also went to, there's a place called Sereg Bach, which is in Anglesey. It's a real place, Sereg Bach. They really found Iron Age um, artifacts thrown into the lake that really existed, and how did they get there? I tell you how they get there, you know. But we went there and took pictures of it and went to the beach where a lot of the stuff happens. And it was like, great, this is where this happened. So I think if you get the opportunity to go to places,
Hmm.
I would recommend it. If you can set the book in a place that you can actually get to, then it's going to be more authentic.
Yeah, you can create that verisimilitude. A lot of the historical writers of historical fiction that I know do exactly that. They travel extensively in the areas that they're writing about, so that they really have a feeling for the terrain. They know what's going on there. They can really describe what the weather's like, how it feels to be there. They can really put themselves
Mm-hmm.
in that place. Another question I have for you is, who is your reader? Who do you envision? Who do you think is your reader? I mean, so is it the person who reads the Bible every day? Is that your reader? Is it
No,
a lover of historical fiction? Is it everybody? Who's your reader?
yeah, I think on a broad sense, it's people who are curious about history, just generic. So, but in terms of biblical history, obviously, if I've got somebody who's maybe I don't know, you don't have to be a religious person. You have to be a thinker, somebody who just wonders about this stuff. And maybe you've seen a documentary about Jesus on TV, or you've been watching The Chosen or something like that. And then along comes a book that is kind of set in that time. So I've got ideas about people who are interested in exploring the different perspectives, maybe of religion, and they're not dogmatic. They're anybody who's truly wedded. If you are truly, absolutely wedded to what you think the Bible is, and you're not open to new ideas, you're not going to enjoy this. You're going to be, yeah, that didn't happen, that didn't happen. But you'd be surprised if you read a book like this, don't know much about the Bible, you'd actually find out, a lot of people would find out what they think they know about the Bible. It ain't so. And so you've got to be somebody with an inquiring mind, I think. And I'd like to think somebody who just enjoys a good read,
Mhm.
a good story. because there is a story to this. And my brother enjoyed it, and he reads an awful lot of books. So, you know, he said, "Oh yeah, it's great." I forget which author he said it sounded like to him, but Grisham, John Grisham. He said, "Oh, it sounds like John Grisham to me." So I said, "Well, that's great, bro. As long as you can access it." And he reads a lot. He's a very bright guy. So got to be somebody who's interested in things. I read some notes here. Interested in a nuanced, humanized portrayal of Jesus. Right? Somebody who might say, "Well, how did this? If he lived? I mean, he ate food. You know, he went to the bathroom. He had jokes with his mates. He probably fell in love. You know, so how did that go down? How could that possibly have gone down and still be aligned with what you read in the Bible?"
Well, have you shared it with any clerics or church people at
No,
all?
I'm afraid of getting
Reaction
shot, to be
is?
honest.
What?
We joke about I'm going to open up the door one day if this book gets out there and somebody's just going to go, you know. It's not quite the fatwa job, you know, the on what's his name, Salman Rushdie. You know, it's not quite. I'm not. That's why it's agnostic. You know, I don't think I might upset the deeply religious. I might not. I might actually. I'm hoping that some people who are very religious will read this and say, yes, that makes sense to me, that this is the Essenes had this influence on Jesus.
Aren't you curious about that? I would be very curious to see how
Well, maybe.
the true believers feel about your book. I would imagine that some of them would be actually quite interested in the research that's gone into it, the actual historical research that you've taken the time to dig in.
Yeah, and thank you. I have taken the time to make sure it's consistent and plausible. I'm sure there are errors. You know, I'm sure some academics going to say, you know, I'm sure, but you know, that was 2 years before that. You know, that couldn't have happened in that sequence. But yeah, I don't think I'm far out because all the dates are messed up anyway. You know, you think Jesus? When do you think Jesus was born?
You know, they're not recorded in the same way.
Yeah,
I
they're
mean,
not.
I
So
do remember looking at Herod's, you know, when did Herod reign? And they have to
exactly.
go to all these different sources to find out, you know, exactly when he was.
And they still don't know. So
Same thing with the
Herod
Buddha.
died in 4 BC, probably.
Mhm.
Probably. That's the best guess. He died in 4 BC. That's the established thing. Well, he must have died after Jesus was born because he was upset about Jesus being born and was going around trying to kill all the children. So
Yeah, they're off by 100 years here and
a
there.
couple of
It's
years.
like,
No, a couple. So maybe 6 BC, right? So if he was crucified around 33 AD, he was 39. He wasn't a young man of 30. He was 39.
That's why I thought it was so amazing that you sort of pieced it all together into this timeline that made sense in your book, because the information is in such little tiny, it's like a little tiny scrap here and a little tiny scrap there, and to piece it all together into something that actually has a chronology was
Yeah,
amazing.
and an integrity to it. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
That
you.
crosses time and space was pretty amazing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where people can buy the book and when the next one's coming out and what your plans are for this book?
Yeah, well, this book you can get now on Amazon. So the Agnostic Gospels, Book 1, Arimathea. Right, so this is book 1 in the series. You can also get it at a local bookstore because it's now available through Ingram Spark, who distribute to bookstores. So you could go to a bookstore and say, "Oh, I'd like to buy this book, you know, please." No. And so that's how it's available. I have no plans for publicity, for book tours, for releases, and I think I'm going to be talking to you to get advice on that, because writing the book is one thing, but actually getting it out there is another. And so for this book, I need a plan, right? I need a plan for that. The Magdalene, which is the second gospel, I'm 220 pages in. I think I got about another 120 to go, something like that. And I'm hoping that's available in the summer. So I'm going to be taking a little trip, but hopefully, you know, maybe June, July time, I should hope to release that if I can. And then Yeshua is going to just be I'm just going to start banging out Yeshua. I've got a lot more research to do for Yeshua because I got to do all the Tibet stuff. But, given that this one took me 10 years, if I can get Yeshua done within 9 months, that would be a huge accomplishment. But I need to, if people like the book and they want to know how the story unfolds, then I need to do it. Because although I parallel the Gospels, the ministry of the last 3 years of Jesus' life pretty straight, it's all with a new perspective that you've learned through these stories about why he's doing what he's doing, what he believes, and the twist at the end.
So my advice to you would be find a publisher. I mean, I think this book is a really wonderful book, and I think the whole concept is really wonderful. I enjoyed the read immensely. I read a lot. And this is, I would put this on my list in historical fiction. I think it's a really wonderful book. It challenges a lot of ideas. It introduces a lot of ideas, and it certainly makes one think about the possibility that this isn't just a story in a book, but a person who actually existed. A wonderful way to look at that bit of, I guess, religious history.
Yeah.
It makes
thanks.
Very real.
So from your mouth to God's ears, as it were. So
Get it
in front of a publisher. I mean, it's I will be talking to you. I should be seeking your advice on how one gets it in front of a publisher without them just saying, no, you didn't ask her, you didn't send a query letter, you didn't send.
Well, get an agent.
That's it.
You need an agent.
So I need to talk to you about how I get an agent. So thank you.
You need one. So hopefully we get this posted and up, and some agent hears you talking about it. Will you be talking about it anywhere else? Do you have any other plans to?
Well, right now I don't. I guess I'm stuck into writing the second book, but I live in a community, and I live in near Las Vegas. I live in Henderson, Nevada, and our community has a wonderful community center. It's like a cruise ship sitting down there, and it's got 80 odd different clubs in it, and rooms, and with big leather chairs, and there's a book club there. So maybe I can inveigle my way into the book club and say, can I do a reading or something like that? I don't know. But this is my greatest failing, is marketing. I just don't have it. When I did Google Kajube, I gave it away pretty much to everybody. So same thing for David Oodles Doodle. Kevin Plotner needs a shout out. He's the illustrator. But, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at saying, please buy my stuff,
Well, sometimes you have to give it away first and have people read it and see what they think about it. And then they'll spread the word or tell people about it. They'll certainly tell you about it. And I think that's a good way to start, is by just by sharing it with people and letting people see what a wonderful read it is. And then they might recommend it to somebody else, certainly the way it's situated right now, so that they can buy it.
Yeah, and it's good. That's good advice for other people listening, right? So what we want to come out of this is these craft things is, well, I'm trying to write a book. What did I learn today? Did I learn anything of value about writing a historical novel? So how to get it out there is one main thing, right? It's once you've written it.
Also, there are book clubs where writers' book clubs, and you could become, you could join those. A lot of those are online as well.
Oh, okay. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah.
That's a really good way to get the word out about the book. Well, I don't know that we have any questions. Elizabeth,
we do
any
not.
questions?
No questions. No
questions.
Well, that's easy then.
Yes. Well, those of you who did join us tonight, we're really happy that you did. Thank you very much for coming to this webinar. Upcoming, we have Perry Garfinkel at Book Passage, and he's going to be reading from his latest book, Becoming Gandhi. So we seem to be on a little spiritual course this month. Bernie, it's been really wonderful
Oh, thank
having
you
you
so much. It's a delight. I mean,
join
it's an
me for
honor.
a talk about your book. I really did enjoy it. I think if people would pick it up and read it, they would enjoy it as well. It's quite a journey.
Well, thank you. So that's what it looks like when you find it. This is a proof draft thing, but that's the book. And
Loving the cover.
yeah, more to come.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being the person in control behind the scenes. Thank all of you who joined us this evening, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you, Bernie.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's
Okay.
an honor. Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Good night,
Take
everyone.
care. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye now.